Welcome to Great Karate Myths, Debunking the Legends, a podcast that chops through the forest of martial arts folklore to reveal the true essence of karate. Join us, your hosts, Shania, Nathan and Tom, as we take you on a journey through the dojo of doubt, where we question the tall tales and test the traditions that have shaped karate as we know it. From the mystical to the misunderstood, we break down the myths and build up the facts. But don't worry, debunking doesn't mean disrespecting the art. We'll be celebrating the rich history of karate while setting the record straight. Whether you're a seasoned black belt, a novice starting your karate path, or just a curious listener, prepare to have your preconceptions shattered and your understanding of karate deepened. So tie up your belts, bow in, and let's get ready to rumble with truth. Welcome to this week's episode of Great Karate Myths, Debunking the Legends. And today's topic is why kata are not self-defense. Okay, well, there's one hell of a loaded statement. Tom, where are we going with this?
Okay, strap in. Well, the idea of self-defense is a bit ridiculous, really, isn't it? Because really, there's violence. You know, you're going to be if there's going to be a fight or you're going to be assaulted. There's only really violence. Self-defense is a bit of a fancy idea, isn't it? That you could somehow control violence in that way or contain it into, you know, something neat and tidy like you might find in a kata. Violence is chaos. It's mucky, it's messy, there's nothing organized about it. The idea that you could defend yourself as well, if someone assaulted you and you were lucky enough to be able to take a punch or a hit or a surprise and fight back, would that look anything like a kata? Would it be anything like that? And coming in from a kata perspective, what in a kata is going to be useful in a fight? An unarmed fight, an empty-handed fight. So, yeah, those are the two sort of leaping off points and, you know, jump head first into either of those. I think the kata's a good place to start. I mean, when you think about the body of antique forms, Kusanku, Chinto, what about those forms is anything to do with being stabbed or randomly assaulted by a group of, you know, group of people or a pub fight?
That's what we've been told, surely.
Exactly. The kata's full of blocks and strikes, isn't it?
I mean, yeah. I mean, the great thing about YouTube is that there are hundreds, thousands of videos of CCTV footage, things recorded on phones of, it's not pleasant to watch, but people being assaulted and stabbed. And what, you know, one of the big takeaways from that is that it's so fast and it's so vicious. How's a block gonna come into play there? And you know, this is the really old topic and was really, really well covered by sort of Jeff Thompson and you know, people in that community that were really, he created pressure testing the martial arts and, you know, that kind of the work he did. And Nathan had his own involvement in that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, Jeff Thompson, because there were several. That was I think he's not active at the moment. He was the English self-defense expert. I think he famously published a book called, I believe it was Mind My Back. And it was
Watch My Back.
Based on What's My Back, thank you. Based on his experiences as a doorman at a nightclub or about England that we tend to call, well, we used to, not anymore. You know this better than I do, Tom. Like we used to call them bouncers, and that's what this gentleman worked as. He relayed practical experience in a book. I don't want to steal, as usual, Tom's thunder because people need to hear what he has to say. But I just wanted to put a couple of items in place. Just two. There are many I could do, but just two. The first one is who's doing the fighting, and we know that on most occasions, most people going about their business don't have a fight, and at worst we bash an offender on the car, or have an argument or a disagreement, and only the psychopath and like-minded really want to engage in any kind of violence. Actually, most of us, most of the time, do not. Although obviously, many people have to watch their tempers, so to speak. If I extend that to war, not an expert in armed conflict, but taking a look at the Vietnam War, which was a terrible PR, if not the waste of many thousands. I think it was 60-odd thousand plus. Don't quote me. American lives. There were issues with soldiers, young men, sort of conscripts, who really didn't want to fire their guns at anybody, and they just fired them sort of vaguely. And I can't remember the stats. I used to have them for some research I was doing, but that was about 15 years ago. But to cut to the chase, vast majority of the small arms fire was completely wasted. It was just that they would just empty their magazines and run out of ammo and fall back for some more. Quite shocking, really. No, I'm not saying anything negative about the American military because I think in perception they're the strongest military on the face of the earth. So I'm not questioning that or any of their bravery. Just the circumstances that they found themselves in. And the points I'm trying to make are that most of us, most of the time, don't want violence. So what group of people are going to most likely be get involved in violence? And I think that I'm going to leave that as a rhetorical question for now, and make the second point, which is that notwithstanding that most people most of the time don't want violence, but we have to recognize two broad types of it, because they often get conflated or confused. So we call type 1 is unwanted violence, random violence that happens. There's a perpetrator. Sorry about the careless terminology, but there'll be a perpetrator and a victim or a target. The target doesn't want this encounter, and the perpetrator does. That's one type of violence in these two broad classifications. Another type of violence, which people get they confuse the two, because the second type I'm raising here is the agreed combat, the duel, the competition. Now, we raised this I can't remember which podcast, in one of our recent podcasts. That's an agreed combat, which probably is almost the worst, not in terms of the risk to life, but it's the most useless environment for the application of kata, which is why we seldom see the use of kata in competition, in karate competitions, or in sparring, or even in sparring, or in tournaments. So I think that foundation in the hope that Tom will hopefully come in here and clarify, what the kata.
What about the argument that kata builds muscle memory? Like if I practice a high block thousands of times, it'll kick in automatically when I'm attacked.
Well, yeah, I mean, the simple answer to that is, how does that type of muscle memory line up with your innate reflexes and response to violence? So when you're startled or you're suddenly attacked and your body's adrenalized and you go into a very, very heightened state, how does that type of muscle memory marry up with those patterns of behavior and innate reflexes? And, people that are startled and suddenly violently assaulted don't suddenly seem to be leaping into perfect moves from a kata. And the way that they're taught is alongside this, what Nathan just described, the second type, which is this dueling. So it's always one-on-one. There's always a winner. Someone gets attacked and then the other person is miraculously wins that altercation without taking any punishment, without getting hit. It's a very, very controlled environment. And if kata were really for violence and self-defense, it would somehow have to be able to fit into that chaos of a fight. And it doesn't. So, A attacks B and then there's a block. It's nonsense. It's got nothing to do with a real fight. And again, I'll just direct people back to looking at, it's horrific to watch, but when you see some of the footage of real violence, it's unbelievable how fast it is. And particularly with stabbings, somebody can be stabbed several times in a couple of seconds. And the other person has no idea it's even happened. It's so fast. And none of that is reflected in what a majority of the karate world is doing with kata. It doesn't matter how fast or how efficiently, you perform the bunkai. If it's still the same old, it can't be scripted. It's got to fit into an unscripted, chaotic mess that is, vicious. And so what you don't see is you don't tend to see two people attacking one person at the same time and then applying kata and that kind of stuff. So
just quickly, just an anecdote. Sorry, Tom, I don't want to spoil it.
Yeah.
I remember Wong Sun Lung, the late Wong Sun Lung, the late great Wong Sun Lung. He was the sequel of my old dear friend Nino Bernardo, and I remember Wong Sun Lung saying to me on one occasion, "I can only fight one person at once because I've only got one pair of arms."
Yeah. So the kata don't look like a fight, an unarmed fight. We can find lots of evidence for that. Choreographing or trying to predict in a very controlled, safe way isn't going to be particularly helpful in preparation for an altercation. So, is that what the kata were really intended for? I doubt it, and I think that going in a slightly different direction, that choreographed stage combat, which has a lovely, rich history in China, is greatly responsible for people's views on what could be done in an unarmed fight. So there are unbelievable performers and kung fu stylists and martial artists in China and the rest of the world who have inherited the opera style kung fu and the street peddler style kung fu, this very performative stage choreography, which later became kung fu movies, and it's right there in front of you. And I think it's kind of got mixed up in people's views of what violence is really, really about. And so the stage combat and the stage forms, which are so believable, those views are carried over into the antique kata, which are a different type of form and nothing to do with stage combat. And that, I think that has, the movies now makes it very believable that a fight could be an exchange of blocks and parries and counters and traps and sweeps and throws, and you get back up again and you take a punch in the face and you get back up again. The reality is, after a couple of blows, quite quickly people get battered, which is what they say. So I think that the history of martial arts in China and stage combat is partly responsible for the crossover. I used to believe it myself. I used to believe in the choreography of the bunkai. That if I was grabbed or someone did this, I would respond in this way and stuff like that. But the reality is it just doesn't work like that.
Yeah, I mean, you just said talking about bunkai. There are so many videos out there.
Yeah.
And for those for those listeners who aren't familiar with the terminology bunkai, it's the application of the kata, right?
Sorry, technically the term means analysis. But it's more to do with analysis, or to stretch that point. It's that has become interpretation. But it's common to find different schools with different applications in quotes for the same kata. But the term is analysis, and that has allowed coaches and teachers to escape having any clarity, having any certainty as to what these kata are for. They're able to put analysis. Well, by the time it got in the USA, Kai became a creature of its own creation. Can I, Tom? I'd like to press you. I'd like to go back to what we did in a previous podcast, because I think we need to look at reactive and proactive. I think that's probably where this is likely to all come together.
Yeah. I mean, popping back to Jeff Thompson as well. One of the things that he said after having hundreds and hundreds of altercations on the door was the only thing that consistently worked and could be relied upon was to go first. And so he developed a devastating preemptive, a right cross or something, I don't know exactly, but he got so good at reading the signs that something was going to happen that he would just always go first. And he said that was the only thing that could be reliable. Everything else became a kind of support. If you ended up grappling on the ground, you were in big trouble. If you because other people would, join in, or the possibility of weapons and things like that. So it opens up a very, very, suddenly the risk factor goes through the roof after that first couple of seconds if you haven't gone first. Reactive, the fact is people get knocked out very, very quickly. There isn't time to react and perform a block or anything like that most of the time. So if you're fortunate enough to still be standing after getting punched in the face or assaulted, then you're fighting on the back foot anyway. So I don't think any of the antique forms are reactive, by the way, as well. I think that the intention is that they're for the use of weaponry, and B, that it's all proactive. There's no choreography, and I don't think it's valuable to preserve any kind of martial skills or techniques in the form of choreography. It's what you can do going first, depending on where you are in relation to the person, and those kind of maps. That's about as far as you can go with it, really.
So what about the argument that kata provides confidence and discipline, feeling strong?
I just think that's bullshit. Weightlifting gives why not go and lift weights? Getting strong will give you confidence. It's easy to, when you haven't got the original functions of the forms, it's very, very easy to sell it as anything, can't you? Kata is spiritual training, it's shugyo, it's discipline, it's, empower. It's a load of old crap, really, because that's not what they're for. Yeah, go on, Nathan.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Thanks. But we've got such a vast array of quite exotic looking movements in 50 plus kata. Unless if we just looked at mainstream karate styles, I'll take 3. I think modern Shotokan has 27 and growing. Traditional Shotokan has 27. During the time of its founder, Funakoshi Jichin, who, let me just get this right, died in 1957. Funakoshi Jichin published a book called Karate do Kyohan, which was published the same year as my mother was born, 1936. And in that book, he demonstrated 15 kata. And so certainly by the late 70s, that had grown to 27. Miyagi Chojun Sensei, the founder of Ko-do Ryu karate, who died in 1953, enumerated allegedly, a bit of a story here. There are 12 kata normally in traditional Goju-ryu, which is one of the main traditional karate styles. Although historically, Miyagi Chojun Sensei only taught 3 kata to each. He always taught Sanchin first, then he taught a second kata quite frequently. After 1917, he taught Tensho, and then he taught a different student a different third kata. I've covered that topic in The Great Karate Myth, in which I suggest one possible solution to that enigma. But the important thing is that that's a lot of kata in which to try and suggest, well, we've got to go first. Jeff Thompson, the self-defense expert that we've been discussing, I think he gave up kata as far as I can remember, and just relied on. I think Tom's right on a punch, a go first attack. So we can't say that that's exactly how every kata is. So I think Tom's laid the groundwork by suggesting that many of the kata are actually about manipulating short weapons, and in a preemptive way. And when they're not, and if they're not weapons, and we can give some examples, and we have done within the Ko-do Ryu approach to karate. But do you want to go through it, Tom, or shall I carry on?
You carry on, go for it.
Thank you. Okay, so the function of the kata will invariably be preemptive, but it will be one of controlling, shutting down the distance. You can see, if you get to see the clip, I know Tom would want to do it differently, but we've all learned a lot since 2006 in the semi-demonstration at the National Exhibition Centre in Birmingham in England. But shutting down the distance with the sai, stopping the weak swordsman from having free rein with his sword. And the whole trick is to try and prevent him from drawing the sword in the first place. And the same will be true of the kata that are not designed to be used as weapons. Daihanshin is one example, where the object would be to get a grip on the person before they can get going, before they can start causing a problem, and getting a clamp on them and getting the first limb completely controlled. In that sense, we might be looking at, we might be talking here about something that looks a bit more like jujitsu. Unlike judo, however, and I think this is a truism, although many people out there will disagree with me, the authentic, use that word carefully, I use the words Tom has used, I think, the antique kata don't display any ground fighting. There's no ground grappling. So that tells you something. The control must already have taken place. And as Tom has made clear, there are no exchanges, as you find in a kung fu movie. There's no choreography. There are no backwards and forwards or point scoring as you would get in perhaps a box. It's the operator who goes to subdue his target, which gives you 2 different roles: the arrestor and the arrestee. So that's the person doing the arresting and the person being arrested. And I think that's probably the most useful way of looking at these kata, their function. I'm back. Thanks for letting me come in there.
I think just when people consider the karate kata as self-defense, if they took a moment to what do they mean by it? What are they considering as self-defense? If they were to write down a list of what are all the qualities of self-defense, what's the criteria, then try and make up a kata from it. Make up a self-defense kata. Would it look anything like Chinto? I doubt it. Would it look anything like Sanseiru? I doubt it. It don't look anything like it, because what's your starting point going to be? Is it going to be that someone throws a part, all that kind of stuff? And then you're going to have all the problems of the reality of blocking a punch is very unlikely. When you consider what self-defense is or fighting is or anything like that, very, very, very quickly you run headfirst into some really, really serious problems when it comes to encoding that in a kata. And so it suggests to me that it's for something else. And as Nathan's described, that the preemption and the context is preemptive and, and mostly for weapons. It's a world away from the kind of popularist view that karate is an unarmed, self-defense art that's going to, if you practice the kata enough, you're somehow going to, and you do your bunkai drills, you're somehow going to survive an altercation with someone. I think that's a bit of a fantasy, really. So it's just asking those questions a little bit more. Well, what do you mean by self-defense? What do you mean? And how would you go about encoding it? Thinking about that. If even people that try and do it, they realise that what they produce is nothing like those antique forms. Yeah.
And I think we've discussed it so many times in the past. If you look at sport fighting or boxing, you get the double cover and the crouch with the shoulders up, the jaw. They look nothing like the straight backs and heads up of the Sanchin kata and other kata. They don't look at all the different requirements, but also the whole idea of modern and traditional karate become sort of bound together. That's where it's gone wrong. We can trace this back to the aforementioned Funikoshi Jichin sensei, the founder of Shotokan. Although he didn't name it Shotokan himself, Shoto was his pen name, and his students are the ones that decided to call it, to name their hall or their group after using the pen name of their teacher. But he wanted to make karate do. He was a very well-educated Confucian scholar and a school teacher, and he wanted to create something that he termed karate do, or do, karate, the way of karate. And to do that, he coined a term. I'm not sure whether he originated it, but he certainly perpetuated it. And that term is karate nisente nashi, and which really crudely translated means there's no first attack. Actually, nisente means initiative or going first. So what he created was a statement that was completely at odds with the reality of going first, pinning down, trapping and preventing, and made karate do very much a almost a passive, reactive art. So the idea was, you're the good guy, the attacker's the bad guy. It needs an attacker to come at you, and then you, the good guy or good gal, would find a suitable response. I don't want to be disrespectful to the great founder, but there's, and I'm not at all being critical, but there's a little bit of gentlemanly naivety in terms of not experiencing or seeing the type of violence that Tom has described. I think it's not for me to say what your experiences are, Tom, but you are a very well-rounded martial artist. So whilst your history and knowledge is very in-depth, you're also very practically grounded. That's probably the safest way to put that. Plus, you've got a much more rounded experience than perhaps some of the old masters had in the past, who really didn't involve themselves in any fights. And when we do get recorded history of so-called tough guys from back in the day, then the first one to spring to mind, and the first one always raised, is an individual called Motable Choki, who was a contemporary of Funikoshi Jichin, who allegedly had 100 fist fights in the red light district of Naha. I find that difficult to believe, that you could go through that many fights, not suffer any damage, his broken noses, jaws, injury, I think it's a tall story. And we never, nobody, it's myth making. It's legend. So karate nesenti nashi, there is no initiative, there is no first attack or first hand in karate. Ergo, therefore, karate is primarily a defensive art. Somebody attacks you and you defend. Which, as Tom's already made very clear, you are already immediately at a disadvantage, and as Tom described it, on the back foot. You have to recover. And if that attack gains momentum, and for example, in boxing or in a compound attack, so that's not one punch and stand still, an oizuki, stepping punch in a nice, neat, straight line, which I'm not knocking, because it's a good way to train and gain the experience, particularly to train young people. I can find lots of reasons for the establishment of conventional karate, even if much of it is away and distant, very distant from the actual purpose of the kata. But a compound attack, once it's underway, particularly if being delivered by someone who's experienced, it already leaves you partially defeated. And the trick of the kata, what's found there, is the art of stopping it. It's stopping that weapon before it's even drawn. That's what we're really looking at there. Moving usually to a corner, pinning, trapping, controlling the second limb. Tom will be able to say more about the kata such as Kusanku and Chinto and Pasai from the Shuri tradition, but I'll stick to just the Naihanshin from the Shuri tradition, which is definitely about getting those limbs tied down and controlled. And the same strategy is used in the original, in the Weichi Sanchin, except that control is occasioned by the use of a pair of sai.
I think what we've been talking about today is we're not talking about whether people can or can't fight. Just what underpins it is whether the katas were originally intended for that purpose, and where in play over the timeline and history of it may have gone wrong. So we've kind of covered a lot of different areas about where the perceptions after the functions have been lost of these forms, what's happened to them, where it's gone wrong. And so, self-defense, applying kata for self-defense is an idea that sort of speaks to where it's gone wrong, and that's not to attack any individual or anybody that teaches or practices that type of karate. But
sorry, I just want to find one important point that Tom was making. The step and punch, down block and middle block, the structured karate, which is the lifeblood of both karate clubs, that in terms of so-called traditional karate, we're not in any way denigrating that. It's fun. It cultivates martial spirit. Children can do it. In fact, it's as long as the movements aren't exaggerated, it's good for them. And also, and here's something that's so important: if it's done sensibly and correctly, it's safe. So we're not knocking ordinary punch kick karate by any means. Thanks for reminding me of that, Tom.
Well, can't kata at least help with self-defense, like building basics?
I think in short the answer is no. When you say basics, what do you mean? Basics for self-defense, what is that? What does that look like? Because the question you're asking and the way that you framed it is makes sense to karate people, because there are basics in karate, and the belief is that those basics are going to go toward be useful in a fight or in self-defense. But actually, when we put karate aside for a moment and we talk about, well, what is self-defense really? What does it really encapsulate? Again, we come back round again to looking on YouTube at real fights and real altercations, and what we find is it looks nothing like karate. And how on earth is Chinto going to find a way into that? So yeah, is it a good starting point in preparation for self-defense to practice a solo form that you don't know what the meaning of the moves are? No, I don't think it is.
been referred to as swimming on dry land.
Yeah, I think so. I think anyone can. You don't have to go out and have hundreds of fights anymore to find out the truth of that. I think you can just see just how violent things can become very, very, very quickly by seeing some of the footage or putting on some gloves and just, if you want to get something that resembles it, that is closer, do a couple of rounds of full contact sparring and just see where your kata fits into that. Because if it doesn't fit into a controlled environment like the ring, it's not going to fit in anywhere in an uncontrolled environment when it comes to unarmed fighting. So, yeah, there's ways of looking at, exploring it and thinking about it. But I think I suppose what I would encourage people to do is have a bit more curiosity about it, about what people are saying kata are for. That's the invitation in our group, is to look a bit closer at these kata and say, is it really? Not saying that we're right and have got all the answers, but we've got the questions at least.
Yeah, coming now, really, we're talking about what we do in our group in Ko-do Ryu.
Yeah.
Kata Ryu has kata. Do you want to talk about really where that is?
Go on, Nathan.
I'm happy to do that. Well, we looked at this. I'll keep this brief because otherwise it's a whole another subject. We were told that tradition told us, the history books told us, teachers told us, and I mean, we've had plenty of high caliber teachers. Sanchin is the beginning and the ending of training. So we took that seriously. So Ko-do Ryu was actually structured on Miyagi Chojun's version of Sanchin, without so much of the deep breathing and hypertension. And we looked at applications. Now, I would say, I can't speak for anyone other than myself. For me, by the time Barefoot Zen was published in 2000, we had already taken the training in a more holistic way. Now, I don't mean that to sound wishy-washy, but we'd found that character building, and we developed in a proper way through receiving proper instruction at a real Buddhist monastery from real monks and nuns, where we realized the cultural nuance that led to the creation of these characters. And what we understood was that even though they are ultimately functional ways of controlling and dealing with violence, they are noble in their structure, where the operator, the arrestor, doesn't set out to maim or brutalize or kill the other person. That's the stuff of fantasies, more myths and legends. But they seek to restrain and control, causing minimum harm and minimum damage. And we simply refine that further through creating spontaneous applications through contact and contact reflexes, done by instinct and by touch, hence the use of pushing hands. Again, not something we invented or created, but something we were originally taught. I could go on, but they are noble in character, and they are not thuggery or brutality or ground grappling, or despite the unsavory images in publications of eye gouging and so on. There is no eye gouging in no Hanshin kata. There's no eye gouging in Miyagi Sanchin. That's completely absent. These are largely noble pursuits, and we sought the nobility aspect of the art and saw that as potentially the most useful and productive development of that, rather than having this sort of outdated civil arrest procedure using pretty much obsolete weapons.
I need to clarify one of the points that you made, Nathan, that talking about pushing hands, that was you developed that system. The particular pushing hands that we do, that was your invention, if you like. We haven't seen anyone else perform pushing hands the same way.
No, thank you for that. And I take that point with some humility. I'm the one. Yes, I did structure it, but it wasn't random and ad hoc, and it wasn't flowy and spontaneous. What it was a very specific structure based on the human anatomy and its physiology, and based on a gate system using two outsides and a center. Hence the passing of the forces through those gates. So it was highly structured and based on the wrist, the elbow, and the shoulder, and how those joints operate on various tilts, and the way that force could be profitably passed through those gate structures, which would lead to possibilities for openings, and the spontaneous application of techniques from the kata, which meant we could then avoid the need to choreograph or to pre-arrange. So there's no pre-arranging or choreography in our applications of the kata. They're all spontaneous. The structure was mine, thank you, with help from my colleagues.
I'll just add one thing to that, if I may, Nathan, that the pushing hands that we practice has nothing to do with self-defense either. So just to make sure we're not saying it. And again, it's another thing that may have become the kind of ideas have become mixed up, that pushing hands in some way has some value towards preparing for a fight. It doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll leave it at that.
That's a perfect conclusion. Perfect conclusion. Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, I think that wraps it up. Kata's not self-defense.
Well, I think so.
Well, that's all the time we have for today on Great Karate Myths. For those karate enthusiasts out there, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember, whether you're a seasoned black belt or just starting your karate journey, there are always myths and misconceptions to be debunked. If you liked what you heard, be sure to like, subscribe or follow Great Karate Myths, Debunking the Legends, wherever you get your podcasts. We love to hear from our listeners, so leave a comment below and let us know what karate myths you'd like us to tackle next. And hey, if you're interested in booking a seminar or finding a local karate class, get in touch with us at www.kodoryu.com. Thanks for listening. Train hard, stay curious, and we'll see you next time on Great Karate Myths, Debunking the Legends.